So wait, this is what's new in MySQL 5.1. Is anyone using 5.1 yet? Okay. Do people want an upgrade? Yes, no, maybe? If I promise you it won't break anything? I can't promise that. So here's the history of MySQL 5.1. The very first release was November 29th, 2005. The first release candidate was September 24th, 2007, so that's about 2 years of developer time. And then the very first GA was, almost a year later. If you compare this with 5.0, MySQL 5.0 went into alpha in 2003. Again, 2 years of development, went release candidate, and then a month later, it went to GA. So why is 5.0 took only a month? Well, they were developed, as you can see, a lot of it was developed alongside each other. Went to release 5.0 went to release candidate September 22nd, 2005. A couple months later, they start working and did the first release of 5.1. So there's a lot of stuff that went but the bug fixes in MySQL 5.0 were able to be used in 5.1. So what's new in 5.1? The three biggest things that are new in 5.1 are partitioning, and this is basically being able to horizontally split your data within a table. So you can have, your months or whatever, instead of having a merge table, it's like automatic merge tables, except with better query performance because it can actually skip over the partitions it's not going to use. There's
Sphinx?
The same as Sphinx?
Yep.
Well, it's a different implementation, right?
No, well actually I'm just speaking on MySQL's partition. I'm not sure much people do use it in the web.
Well, it's a very new thing. I mean, MySQL is only generally
available for
6 months.
6 months, but still in.
Yeah, GA November.
Right, but in RC state for 1.5 years.
Right. So.
Had some time.
Yeah. Row-based replication. This is more like an Oracle type of replication, or more like you might be more familiar with something like a DRBD. Instead of a statement-based replication where it logs the statement itself, like insert into blah, 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 it actually just replicates the data changes, which is good and bad. It takes more bandwidth usually, but it's good in the fact that you actually get the exact same data, as opposed to if you're using, say, a non-replication safe function like sysstate. Sysstate is not actually replication safe. It will just take the system time. So if you have slaves at a different time than the master, sysstate is going to give you different values on the master and slave. And there's a plugin API, so that there can be plugins for storage engines and all that stuff, and you can compile your own plugins and put them in. Those are the three big features. There's.
What kind of plugins?
I'm sorry.
What kind of plugins?
What kind of plugins?
Yeah.
There's everything from a storage engine plugin to, there's anything you can compile, right? What's
Mostly there are information. The easiest ones are information schema plugins, and
the full text API.
We have an
which
expert
is,
in plugins here.
Yeah, the full text API isn't complete yet.
It's been in the same state for more than a year.
Right.
There's also later in 6.0 there's the audit plugin, and there's 5.1 there's I think there's an event plugin which exists.
There's the event scheduler.
Yeah.
But you said there's also an audit plugin?
Yeah, the 6.0 has the audit plugin.
6.0.
Yeah. And there's also third-party plugins add-ons available. Like, for example, I have in my patch a plugin for external language stored procedures. So you can have Perl or Java stored procedures.
How come that's not generally available to most people who can just compile it in? I don't remember seeing a blog post on that. That would be useful.
It was nearly complete at the time I left MySQL, and it just never really got in, and I've been maintaining it ever since.
So it's been nearly complete ever since.
Well, it works quite well now.
You will have a lot of fans if you
use
external language store procedures.
There's actually 2 presentations on it at the user conference.
Alright.
Yes, and I blogged about that.
Well, I read your blog just after. I actually haven't read blogs in like 2 weeks because I've been preparing for the conference. So another really big thing is an event schedule, which is really cool. It basically replaces all those little cron scripts you have to do something every 5 minutes or every hour. As long as you can do it in SQL, you have this event scheduler. I'm going to guess that your external language store procedure may also work for events.
If event schedule can call any SQL, the external store procedure is just invoke just normal SQL. So you can do all kinds of really hackish stuff.
Great. That's what we're all about. MySQL 5.0 also has log tables, so instead of just the files, the general log, and the binary log, things like that, you have tables for them, which is more useful to query them. There's 2 new tables in the information schema. One is process list, which is very much more convenient to be able to query because you can query things that are only over a certain number of seconds. You can query things that are only from a certain user, only from a certain host. Very, very useful.
But there might be history there, like for a month or something like that?
No, there's no history.
Or the current process?
Yeah. The information schema is a system view, and it's just a snapshot of what it is now. It doesn't store, it doesn't even store it on disk. So every time you go, it actually has to like reload and look in what it is. And there's an engines table, which shows you the storage engines and what's available and what's disabled and all that kind of stuff.
As a general point on the information schema should be looked at as a replacement to all the show commands, and the show commands in the future may be deprecated.
Yep, that's the idea. It would be hard to do that because there are some things that aren't in information schema, but yes, you should probably use information schema. That's more of the standard. It's the standard data dictionary rather than the show commands. But if it doesn't count things like show create table, but things like show indexes, show tables, show databases, that all can be queried in the information schema. I found that things like show status, show global status, show global variables. It's still easier for me to type show global status, show global variables. But with the information schema, you can say, show me the global variables, in this list of names. So instead of just saying where the global variable, because you can say show global variables like, and then give a wildcard or not phrase. You could say show global variables like log, %log%, to see everything with the log in it. Being able to query a table means you can have 7 different strings. You can say where it's in that. So it's pretty useful. And there's a trigger privilege. Before 5.1, if you wanted to be able to create a trigger, you had to have the super privilege. So this changes into the trigger privilege so that somebody doesn't have all the super privileges just to create a trigger. In 5.1, prepared statements can use the query cache, which is useful, although prepared statements still aren't so great because they still are compiled once per connection. It doesn't retain in memory across connections. And there's a little more XPath support for them if anyone's using any XPath stuff. So there's some new tools. MySQL Slap is not a new tool, but it's newly packaged with MySQL. So when you install the MySQL server, MySQL Slap now comes with it, which it didn't before. MySQL Upgrade is a new tool, and if you can't guess what it does, when you have to run it after you upgrade, and what it does is it will examine the tables and make sure that all the tables are the right format, and if it doesn't do that, it will upgrade it automatically for you, things like that. There's also a few more commands to MySQL check. Fix DB names, fix table names. In 5.1, there's more character support for some things. So you can actually have any kind of character you want in database names and table names. You can put commas and periods in them, which really mess some things up because a lot of people use dot notation for, db.table. And so if somebody names their database, foo.bar, there's some fun things that happen.
What do you use MySQL Slap for?
MySQL Slap is a load testing. It's a load generation tool against MySQL. It's actually pretty robust and useful. So MySQL checks has also check upgrade, which is the same as check table for upgrade, which is kind of the it's in MySQL upgrade. Do you need to upgrade this table? Is it a different format because you upgraded?
Do you want to kill all the data?
Do you want to what?
Kill all the data.
Do you want to kill all the data? Yeah, no.
By running the upgrade.
Nah. And I haven't had.
But you can't promise that.
I make no promises. There's also more new tool functionality. MySQL dump now has a replace, so instead of insert into, you can have replace into. Pretty useful. The single transaction mode doesn't use begin, and the master data actually has some changes in it too. And you can just look at the man page when you install it. MySQL import has a use threads equal n so that you can use MySQL import multi-threaded, which is pretty useful when you're loading lots of data in. MySQL binlog has a whole bunch of new stuff. Server ID, so you can actually filter out by server ID. If you have something like circular replication going on and you want to filter out, that's pretty useful. Base64 output is actually used, I believe, with the row-based replication, which is also new in MySQL 5.1. It'll actually show you the commands with the base64 output, which is the data. Remember, the data will go. There's dump date and skip dump date for both. And then there's MySQL.server, which is the startup script. You can actually, it's not timeout, it's actually timeout. Because I haven't done this presentation, and I still haven't corrected that one. But you can actually give it a timeout for the service startup instead of, the little dots that go. You can actually change how long that goes for. The storage engine changes, BDB, is gone. It's not in there anymore, which probably shouldn't affect you unless you've done something like put skip BDB in your my.cnf, because you didn't want it to use that like 8 megabytes of memory that it would allocate automatically. And if you have that, you have to take it out because now the MySQL server doesn't understand skip BDB because it doesn't understand BDB. Federated is not on by default, so if you use federated tables and you don't have the word federated in your my.cnf, you're going to want to have that in your my.cnf.
It's not even built by default.
It's right. It's not even built by default.
It's not what?
No, in 5.1 I think it is.
It is.
It is.
It
It's
is.
6.0 it's out, but in 5.1 it's in there. It's built in there.
But there's a in the Federated with 5.1 currently there's problems regards you should not use it with transactions if it's not safe.
Well, that's with 5.02. I mean, that's just federated in general.
There is a federated a fork of federated X, which is something which Patrick Albert and I worked on, which is transaction safe.
So if you want to use federated tables and transactions, use federated X instead of federated. But neither of them are loaded by default in 5.1. Have ISOM is deprecated. It's no longer a command. So if you have a really old my.cnf, you can no longer use that. There are some incompatible changes, which is obviously very important. I see you guys scribbling lots and lots of notes. I don't know if all of you are on the MySQL user group site, but I posted to the message boards on the LA user group a link to the slides, and I also had a blog post which delineates like here's what you need to know when upgrading. So feel free to keep writing notes, but you don't have to. MySQL D safe, which is one of the wrappers, the safe wrapper script to start up MySQL, it only checks for MySQL D. It used to check for MySQL D max. There is a parameter you can give it to say check for these binaries. So you can, if you had something called, MySQL D foo, you can have it go and look at that. There are some system variables that are not safe for binary logs. We were talking about that before with like sysdate, which is actually a function, wasn't safe. So for the system variables that aren't safe for binary logs, the statement-based replication will issue a warning or an error, I forget which, that it's unsafe. Mixed replication will actually use row-based replication, meaning that it will actually use the data itself. So in the event that MySQL, the system variables might be different on the master and slave, it will actually use the row-based and move the data itself so that it knows it's the same. And then there's a change in handling the prepared statements, in which case you may need to upgrade the client library. There's a link that you can go to decide if you really need to do that, but hopefully nobody's using prepared statements because they're not so optimized. There's a bunch of configuration file changes. They changed table cache to table open cache. The temp table size default is 16 megabytes. Does anyone have any idea why they might change that from 32 megabytes to 16 megabytes? So max heap table size is 16 megabytes by default, and temp table size by default was 32 megabytes. But the actual maximum practical size of a temporary table is actually the minimum of temp table size and max heap table size. So there was no point in having temp table size be 16 megabytes, be 32 megabytes if max heap table size was 16, because the temporary was just going to be that. So It is actually lowering, you might think, oh, it's lowering a temporary table size, that's not so great, but unless you actually change it from the defaults anyway, you're getting the same practical effect. Max connections default has changed from 100 to 151. Because apparently the default connection number in Apache is 150. So, yeah. It probably doesn't affect you because if you didn't change the default, then it doesn't matter, and if you did change the default, then it doesn't matter. You should stop taking a drink whenever I open my mouth. It's not going to work like that. So, part 2, have rate is removed. I don't think anyone was really even using this function. I've never come across anyone that was using it. Thank heavens that the master functions have been deprecated, so you can no longer put like master host. You can put it, but it's deprecated. Master host, master user, master password. People are putting passwords in their configuration file for replication. Not so great. So it's been deprecated, yes?
Just for everybody information, MySQL Sandbox knows about that, so it doesn't use this anymore.
Great. Great. It's great for me if I'm going on a client and I don't know what the password is. It's just look at the my.cnf and there it is. Not so great for security. There was the one thread option, that's gone. Now there's a thread handling option. So you can say thread handling equals one thread. I don't know if there's any other thread handling option.
So
Probably there.
You have live event available.
Oh, if you have live event. What are the other values that you can put in besides one thread?
I think it is pooled.
Pooled?
Yeah. I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's pretty useful. Part 3, there's a lot of configuration file changes. Host name, so now you can actually set the host name of there's a variable in the server called host name, so you can actually set the host name of it, just like you can set the port or whatever. Error logging can now actually go to syslog, which is pretty useful. You can tag it with a syslog tag, which is pretty good, which is pretty useful if you're sending it to, say, a centralized syslog server. You can tag it with, MySQL 1, MySQL 2, whatever your machine name is. And the enodb log architecture directory has been removed. It's been deprecated since 5.0.24, so there shouldn't be a problem with the fact that that has now been removed, except for the fact that you might get an error when you start MySQL because it's still in the my.cnf. There are some new parameters, table definition cache. And this is, it actually speeds up the opening of tables. So when you open a table, it has to load up the definition, and it can help to autocomplete, things like that. So the bigger the table definition cache is, the more tables you can store in it, and the faster opening a whole bunch of tables is. MySQL uses mmap, it uses memory mapping, makes some things a little faster. Binlog format, binlog row event max size. So the format of binary logs is what is that? Is that between row-based and regular? Yeah. And then the event maximum size for the binlog row, which I think that helps with max. What was it? Max, like the max allowed packet.
Probably.
So new parameters, part 2. Max prepared statement count. The number of prepared statements. There's actually a prepared statement count global variable. enodb stats on metadata. And these are all things you can look up. These are kind of like random little things. So we're getting into the little niggly details. Some of them are, slightly interesting. It depends on, again, how you're using MySQL. This is my favorite parameter they put in MySQL 5.1. It's called old. I would think that by now MySQL engineers would realize that sometimes they give names to features that aren't so great. Old would be one of them that I would think perhaps not so great. It's basically there to be a catch-all for older things. Right now, old in 5.1 deals with the way it processes index hints, because they did a lot of optimization for that in 5.1, so I guess some people were like, no, don't do that. I need it the way I told it to do it in 5.0, so they made the old one. They could have probably named it a little bit better. It's supposed to, because I guess the idea is they'll put a lot of stuff in there if they get a lot of people complaining that they want it to work how it worked before, even though it's more optimized now. Some people, optimize it their own ways. Anyway, it's a bad name, but it probably has good functionality. MySQL check has skip right bin log. So one of the things you do with MySQL check is you check table, analyze, optimize, repair table. Sometimes when you're optimizing a table that has millions of rows, you don't really want that to replicate. So you can actually have this if write bin log for that, which is, again, useful. Part 4 of new parameters. Slave exec mode, I don't expect anyone to really use this. I've read this about 1 million times and I don't really understand the difference between what strict and idempotent mode is, so I won't even try. I have a whole page of notes on that, and the last time I gave this I just ended up reading off the thing, so you guys can just look it up and read off the thing yourself. Uptime since flush status, which is pretty useful, and I think Jeremy Cole actually put that in ages ago, and basically what that is if you flush the variables, right, you want the uptime since you last flushed it, because the number of queries is different. The number of select statements is from the, it's not from the uptime of the whole server, it's just since the last time you flushed. And there's some report, like report host, report user, things like that for, again, just like host name, it's a parameter that you can show. So there's some new features. The manual itself says that there are meaningful stack traces. I'll take their word on it, or at least more meaningful stack traces. I'll take their word on it. About half the time the stack traces are useful, and about half the time they're not, so perhaps it's more than that. That's my own experience. I'm not really so great with stack traces, though.
Well, maybe they're more meaningful for them,
That
not us.
could be that they're more
Not us.
meaningful for them. So, but they didn't really give any details like, oh, when it crashes in this way, we've put more details, or we've put something here that use out more data. They just said it's more meaningful. There's the character set on the MySQL command line. You can actually do \c and change the character set of the session.
For the display.
Not the display, because the display is based on
Oh, the terminal.
right, but the actual connection, like when you send data, you have a client connection, carset client, and carset connection, and carset session, and carset server, and there's 1,000 different character sets. Well, there's like 7 different character set options in MySQL, and so they've added the ability to change your the session connection while you're in the session. You just do \c. And I think there's probably like a carset option too. There's a longer one, I'm sure. Show authors is neat. You can see who wrote it. Show profile and show profiles is actually really, really incredible. There's another, I've put in here another information schema table, which is profiling. And what that can do is that can actually show you which stage, how much time each stage used. So in the MySQL slow log, all you get is how much time it spent waiting for locks and then the total time. But this gives you like 10 different things that it's, it's doing statistics for the query, and then it's parsing the query, and it's optimizing the query, and you can actually see how long each step takes, which is really, really sweet. And then show contributors is a neat function. It's about, I think 3 people who have contributed usually money to causes that MySQL is fond of. So there are some also important bug fixes. Black hole transactions have been worked on. Full text search and apostrophes, although probably Sphinx is probably a little better for full text search, but basically with apostrophes, which could be used, I don't know if you speak French, they might be in a couple of things, apostrophe something. Full text search didn't really work with apostrophes, which is a little Anglo-centric, so they fixed that. So now if you search for, say, Jerry, you'll also get Jerry's apostrophe S, which is really important in a language like French, where the letter L and an apostrophe appears in front of pretty much every word.
Well, you still have to escape all those apostrophes, right?
No, because there's you could use double quotes and the apostrophe is a single quote. So, yes. Information schema uses less memory. I don't think it's actually any faster, but uses less memory, which is good. The replicate do table, replicate ignore table options had a big problem in them. Sometimes you'd see them twice when you put them in once. Not so great. So those have been fixed. New functionalities, faster alter table for some commands. In fact, online alter table for some commands, such as adding an enum, adding a column to the end, not a column, adding a value in an enum to the end of the set of values in enum or set. So if you have yes, no in your enum and you want to add maybe, as long as you add maybe to be yes, no, maybe, it's online. It doesn't take any time at all. Which makes sense, because all you're doing is changing the metadata of the table. All you're saying is, I want this table to be able to allow this extra value. So you don't really need to scan through every row of the data to see if it matches or not, because it doesn't match. It only matches yes or no, because that's what the definition was before. Similarly, adding a column to a table is online, and changing the name of a column is also online. What's not online yet, and I'm not quite sure why it's not online, but maybe it's an InnoDB thing, is adding a foreign key. Because very much like adding a value to enum or set, I don't quite understand why adding a foreign key isn't.
It has to do consistency checking.
No, it doesn't do.
Doesn't it?
Nope. If you turn foreign key checks off and then turn them on, it doesn't actually check the whole data to make sure. So, just like if you lock the tables and then if you turn off the indexes and then turn them on, the actual indexes themselves have to be rebuilt. If you're doing like a bulk load of data, you can turn off the indexes and then turn them on. But a foreign key doesn't check. So I don't see a reason for it not to do that, but I also haven't contributed any patches, so I can't say anything. RAND can now take non-constant initializers when it couldn't before. It could only take constants, and there's a whole paragraph on it. Can take a non-constant initializer if this and that and this and that. So again, if that's really important to you, you can read up on it. And the archive table now will support auto-increment, which is pretty important to people who are logging things for archival purposes, I guess. More new functionalities. MySQL now escapes identifiers, which is pretty important because it now allows any character to be in a table, so it kind of has to escape the identifiers if you're going to put the identifiers in tables, or the identifier names in tables. Full text search has in natural language mode and with query expansion. Sphinx is still probably a better, optimized full text search, even with this stuff, and you can go look up how that works. Do you know about in natural language mode and with query expansion, or?
Well, I've read a bit. I've read their documentation on that, but wasn't really impressed. As far as I remember, it's just something. It's not something like they pre-build an adapted dictionary of keywords occurring in the database and then go to that dictionary. It's, as far as I remember, but I may be mistaken, of course, it's something much more simpler, like just adding the common suffixes to words.
Yeah, common
So
suffixes, and that's like naming natural language.
running.
Yeah.
But then again, I have to look it up again.
Yeah. So again, if you are still using full text search in MySQL and you want to see what the improvements are in 5.1, the pages in the manual are pretty good. Stored routines will now allow a definer. They didn't before. The definer was always the person who was actually defining it. You can now actually change the definer to be somebody else, which is useful when you're talking about like SQL security invoker definer. It's pretty useful to be able to set the definer to whoever you want it to be. More new functionalities. This is why this is a 5.1 and it's not 5.0 point something. I mean, there's a lot in the release. So you can actually use the master SSL verify server cert, which is actually another level with SSL connectivity. Does anyone use SSL to connect? Okay. So with SSL connectivity, it's actually the way MySQL is done. It's pretty neat. You can, once you set up the certificate on the master. It doesn't have to be the master. This is specifically talking about the master, but once you set up an SSL certificate on a server, you can connect with a user. In the user definition, you can say this user can connect unsecured, unsecured and secured, only secured with SSL, only secured with SSL with this particular certificate. And so what Master SSL Verified Server Cert is actually forcing replication to use a specific certificate. So you could always do it with users. Now you can do it with replication. Pad car to full length. If people are really using car, not bar car, and they really want it padded to full length, there's I think that's actually an SQL mode. Pad car to full length. Long query time is now in microseconds. And the interesting thing about it is that long query time is actually displayed in microseconds. For a long time, the minimum value of long query time was 1, and it was full seconds, which means, and the way that MySQL did it was it looks for anything greater than that. So the very shortest query that you could get in 5.0 and lower was 2 seconds or more. You couldn't get 1 second because it had to be greater than 1. It wasn't greater than or equal to 1. So this is a little better. You can now set it to 0, and it will have a microsecond resolution. So you can actually get things in the slow query log that are shorter than 2 seconds. New functionalities. What? Question?
No. Just another peek. In just 10 years, finally, the slow query log became useful.
There you go. Well, the slow query log was very useful. Very few people need microseconds. When you need it, you really need it. But when you're talking to the companies out there, you're talking 95% of the companies out there. First of all, they've got queries that go 5 seconds and they don't even care. But the ones that do care, the second resolution is enough. So it's only the top 5% that really, really need it. Now, granted, they really, really need it. So, who here really, really needs microseconds in the application they have? Okay, so that's 2 out of like 20 we have here, so 10%.
Not a bit.
There you go. New functionalities, log slow slave statements, pretty useful. Minimum examined row limit, so you can say only log in the slow query when it has at least examined this many. So that helps with the log queries not using indexes. You can say log query is not using indexes, but if a query on a 100-row table didn't use an index, I don't care. Show me if a query did a full scan of a 1 million row table. That's what I care about. And then there's DB auto increment lock mode, which helps with the DB auto increment locks. I forget what the commands are at this point, but I think it just allows you to be able to grab more than one at a time. If you really are inserting a lot of data, you might have problems actually, with you might actually intercept each other. What am I trying to say here? You might get
mutual blocking.
Mutual blocking. Thank you.
Of the next key lock, which happens on auto
right. So you're trying to get the next key lock, and you get 2 ones trying to get the next key lock, and they block each other out. Things are. So here's some deprecated features. Show DB status. It's now show engine DB status. But it's deprecated, so I believe the syntax itself still works.
The syntax will work. It will remove the 6 to
yeah. Same with show mutex status. It's show show engine DB mute or show engine mutex status. And then show logs or show BDB logs. Those are both for BDB, and BDB is out of the server, so that doesn't work. More deprecated features, type as a synonym for engine. They actually tried to take this out, completely remove it, and not just deprecate it, and there were too many people who still have type equals something in their definitions, so it didn't work. DB hot backup was actually one of them. Table type, so add table type, and again, show table types. Those should all be engines. It's been engine for a couple of major versions at this point. Skip thread priority, and again, log and log slow queries. That's how you can say what type you want the log to be, table or file, and you can still specify the file. I'm sorry, deprecated. Those are deprecated because you now have to use to say I want a log with a table or with a file. So you can't just say log for the general log, and you can't just say log slow queries because that will be file-based. You can. It's deprecated, not removed. But if you want table-based logging, there are other commands for that. So package changes. We talked about MySQL slot being included. MySQL debug is now included. Safe MySQL D is excluded. MySQL dump slow is now part of the server, not the client, which is pretty normal since that's what creates the slow query logs. And MySQL cluster is a separate product. And the very last slide is there are some new collations. So if you guys have really been hankering for these collations, they're now in there. So that's it. If you're Polish or Hungarian, you